Hello, I'm Mark Licht. I'm an assistant professor and extension cropping systems agronomist. Today we're out here looking at some cover crops that Alison Robertson is using with an experiment that she's got funded for. Alison, can you tell us a little bit about this experiment and what we're looking at?
Sure, Mark. Thanks for having me out here today. So this is an experiment where we're looking at the effect of planting corn into a green rye cover crop on the corn itself, right? And so this is an experiment that's been funded by the USDA NIFA, and it's led by a couple of guys out on the East Coast, Stephen Mirsky and Chris Rehberg Horton. Stephen is at USDA IRS and Chris Rehberg Horton is at North Carolina State University. The really cool thing about this trial is that this exact same trial is being done at 15 other states across the United States. And so what we're doing is we're terminating the cover crops at different times before planting the corn and then after planting the corn, and we're looking at the effect of those termination dates of the rye on not only diseases, which would be my area of interest, right, but also on insects, not only insect pests, but also beneficial pests, and then of course weeds. So we're kind of looking at this planting green from a pest management scenario.
So Alison, I know you've done cover crop research for many years. What would you expect to see from this trial as far as results?
So we actually have done almost this identical trial the past 2 years, also with funding from the USDA. And in that trial, we worked with Practical Farmers of Iowa. So we had a small plot trial like this. And then last year, 2020 and 2021, we'll be working with Practical Farmers of Iowa, and we'll be working on 4 commercial farms and collecting data on the effect of planting green on those farms. But we finished up our small plot experiment, and basically what we found was that corn does not like to be planted green. So I know that a lot of farmers are planting soybeans green and there doesn't seem to be an effect at all. But when we plant corn into green rye, it takes longer to emerge, it's less vigorous, and we tend to see, well, at least in our small plot experiment that we did, we saw a greater yield loss when we planted the corn green as opposed to terminating the rye crop before planting the corn.
So we've done research together, and so I know from that it's all about the amount of biomass that we get, right?
Yes, I agree with you.
So what are some of the effects that we have when we have too much biomass, whether it's planting green or even if we try to terminate ahead of planting?
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, right? We have tons of questions about that. So, but I totally agree with you that I think it has a lot to do with how much biomass is there. So when we think in terms of, like, if I think in terms of as a plant pathologist, right, the more biomass we have above the ground, the more root biomass we're going to have. Those roots are going to be infected with these pathogens that can then jump over onto the corn. So we have more root biomass, so probably more inoculum in the soil that we're planting the corn into. And then the other thing is that the biomass, you know, kind of carpets the soil, right? Which is great if you're managing weeds. But when we think about pathogens, we're just keeping that soil cooler, we're keeping it wetter, and that's exactly what Pythium likes. They want cool and wet. And so I think that combination, if I can talk about the disease triangle that everyone teases me about, I mean, that disease triangle, we have more pathogen, we have more favorable environment, and so I think we have a greater chance of getting seedling disease.
So you've done some socially distanced spacing of rye from the corn row.
Yes.
And I'm gonna ask you to extrapolate on that a little bit, because I think about if we can plant the rye outside of that corn row, could we potentially plant green into the socially distanced rye?
Yeah, so that is something that we're hoping to get funding for. So we're applying for funding for that now, but that's exactly what we're thinking, is that if we can, you know, just like if we stand 6 feet away, we have a lower risk of getting COVID or just a common cold. That's exactly the same as what we found in our research with the corn, was that if we separated the corn from the rye, we saw less of an effect of the rye on that corn. And in actual fact, the yields were similar between a no cover crop and planted away. And then, so we're thinking that we can then let that rye grow bigger for more time. And so then a farmer could, yes, come in, plant his corn, and then terminate his rye afterwards. So yeah, plant green in a socially distanced setting.
So we're out here on a nice brisk day, a nice breeze, not too bad. But it's a little on the chillier side, right? We're standing in some plots that were terminated. Do you want to talk just a little bit about some of the challenges with spring management? And this year planting green seems more realistic than other years. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure, although I'm a pathologist and you're an agronomist. But yeah, I mean, if right now it's, what are we, middle of April? And so, it's probably a long way away in everybody's memory now, but we've just come through 3 weeks of pretty cold weather. And so, I mean, that's one of the reasons why we're looking at planting green and we're so interested in planting green, is because if you do, our recommendation from a seedling disease point of view is to terminate that rye 10 to 14 days before you plant. Well, this rye was terminated probably about 10 days ago, and it was pretty cold, and you can see that it's just taking a long, I mean, it looks like it's dying, and hopefully it will, but it's just going really slowly. And so, yeah, I mean, that's the big question, is in a spring like this here, when it's cold for so long, and you can't get in to terminate your cover crop, then what other management could you use to get in and plant your corn and then still terminate that cover crop?
Yeah, because this rye is roughly 8 inches tall.
Yeah.
And, we've been cooler, right?
Yeah.
And so the general thought of trying to put out glyphosate onto it, maybe using some adjuvants, to help with activity. Yeah. But if it's cold and the plant's not, translocating that glyphosate, it's just not going to terminate as well. As we wrap up here today, what are the big outcomes that you think come from doing research like this and all the other research that you've done as well?
In Iowa, where we have this corn soybean system where we're growing crops for 4 or 5 months of the year, I think that cover crops add to the value of agriculture and also of the environment here in Iowa. And so I think that they definitely have a role to play. So just increasing the time that the ground is covered with green cover. We know that they do enormous help in terms of just protecting against soil erosion, improving water infiltration. We're starting to learn a lot more about how the roots and the organisms associated with them can improve soil health. So, yeah, I know that there's not a lot grown on the landscape in Iowa, but I certainly hope that with our research, we can provide best management practices to farmers who are interested in growing cover crops, and maybe not even interested, but want to benefit their farms, benefit their soil health. And so how can they start to incorporate cover crops into their farm easily and efficiently, with the least amount of headaches possible?